Okay, hi. So today I'm going to show you some techniques that might be helpful for this botanical or botanically inspired artwork that we're doing for this project. And before I start, I just want to go over some things about the paint, the paper, whatnot. By now, if you haven't set up your palette, I just want to go over how to set it up. It's best to put your paint in the wells. I'd say about this much paint, see, in each one. And then this stays here. It doesn't go anywhere. And these trays are for mixing. And I think with those smaller palettes that came with the Blick, with the kit you got at the bookstore, if you got that, the palettes have more wells than these, but that have more mixing trays than these, but those are really good for mixing colors. And those ones you can clean out, like, if you want to change the color. Oftentimes I'll come back and want to use the same color, but if I want to change the color, I just wipe it off here, and then I start fresh. Okay, so, but as far as the paint goes, the paint stays here. Don't wash that out. And then when you come back to paint, most likely your paint will be dry. So you just add a little bit of, you can drop a little water in here to wet it, or you can use your spray bottle and wet it. Just re-wet it. It's great. It's unlike oil or acrylic, which once it's dry. You can always reconstitute it. So with that said, I'm going to take this off. And I was just fooling around here and kind of making, I'll show you another one I did. I was just kind of making these weird meandering shapes. I was looking at the Miron Schmuckel thing, and I think he was a medical illustrator. That's why some of his work looks like body parts. I thought that was funny. Some of them look like plants, and some of them look like organs or something. But anyway, I was just fooling around just to get an idea of how this might work out. And some of the things that I want to point out about this project is you're going to want to have some standalone shapes like these, and then you can connect them with vines or whatever. And they don't have to be plants. They can be birds. You can have birds in there. You can have fish. You can do an underwater scene. You can just make up things and make it look visually interesting. That's why this is kind of a cool project as far as creativity goes. I tried to put a bird in here. I think I made this too big. I probably shouldn't have made this so big because it's a little bit hard to get this technique going in such a big space, but we'll get to that in a moment. So I want to show you some techniques. And before I start with that, I also want to address something about the paper. So this is my watercolor block, and let's see, make sure this is centered. Yeah, this is my watercolor block, and the watercolor block is 100% cotton, and that's why it behaves differently than the Canson pad, which is like 25% cotton and cellulose or whatever else they make it with. And so it doesn't behave the same way. And if you were doing, I just want to say this, if you were doing the stripes, and you can see the difference, see this stripe I had done on this block, this one I had done on the Canson paper. So no matter how careful I was, I still got this kind of weird blotchy unevenness, and that's the paper. That's not you. So if that happened to you, don't worry about it, okay? I don't want you to have to use up all your good paper for practicing stuff on, and you can just remember that it'll always behave better on the block, on the 100% cotton paper. So there's a few things I want to show you. I want to show you first how to do a wet and wet shape. And I just had done some stuff here, like kind of a pear form or something. But wet and wet is based on the idea that you're working on a wet surface with wet paint, and the paint will only go as far as where the water is. So I'll just show you. I'll make a shape. Let's say I'm going to make a shape. I'm going to make it yellow so that you can see it. And you want it to be nice and wet. Like when you look at it, you know, it should be shiny. You know, the light should be reflecting off of it. And I don't know if you could see this, but it's kind of shiny. There's quite a bit of water on here. And it's a delicate balance about how much water you want to put on here as opposed to too much or too little. If you feel like you have too much, you can always blot it up a little bit, like just dry your brush off. I put mine on the towel and then I just can kind of mop it up. But for starters, you're fine because the water's not going to go. Oh, I have a hair in here. I hate when that happens. From my brush. Oh, well, whatever. Okay. You know, the paint's only going to go where the water is. It's not going to go beyond that. And let me show you what happens if I drop some color in there. I'll just try putting some red in here, okay? One of the things that you could practice on the Canson paper before you start is cutting out some edges so that they're nice and clean. I have quite a lot of water on here, so I'm going to pull some of this up. Yeah, I'm going to mop some of this up. Yeah, it's a lot of water. Okay. It should be wet, but not like swimming pools of water. Okay. But, you know, having a lot of water does help with this technique. And the other thing is that you want to use your round brushes for this technique. And I would say for your base coat of putting the water down, use your 6 or your 12 because they hold more water. If you use the little tiny brush, the little tiny brush is good for detail, but for getting this thing nice and wet, you want to use one of these brushes. So, and then later on, you know, you can use the smaller brush for another technique I'll show you in a moment. So let's say I want to get this color a little bit richer. Another thing about watercolor is it will always dry. So I'm going to try to carve that edge out as carefully as I can, you know, the outside edge. And that's a practice skill. But you always want to get, have it be a little bit darker because when it dries, it tends to dry a little bit lighter. So I kind of like to take colors. Here, I'm going to grab some rose or alizarin crimson and just kind of drop them in here like this with the brush. See? And they just kind of do their own thing. That's the nice thing about watercolor is you never know, you can't control exactly what the outcome is going to be. I mean, you can get pretty close to what you want, but it just kind of spreads and goes wherever the water is. And as the paper dries more, the water doesn't spread as much. So another thing you don't want to do, even if you're putting in like now I'm going to put in a little bit more saturated yellow. I would never dip my brush in this yellow and just go directly on here. It's not like oil or acrylic paint. You have to add some water to it, even if your pigment to water ratio is a lot of pigment with not that much water. But as long as this thing's wet, I can keep kind of just dropping in color here. Another thing that I could do, let's say I wanted to have a highlight because this was some kind of piece of fruit, right? You can dry your brush and you can pull out the color while it's wet, like that. And that's actually how I did this, and I'll show you that in a moment. But you could keep fussing with this and working with it. It just depends how detailed you want to get. You know, if I wanted to darken up the shadow side of this or at the bottom of it, I might throw some Hooker's green in here. And of course, you know, the colors are going to mix. So when green and red mixes, it kind of makes like a brown color. But, you know, kind of just dotting it in there. It's also a good technique for texture. What you don't want to do is take it and blend it all together like you do with oil paint. So, you know, you don't see me blending it and blending it and blending it. I'm just kind of dropping it in. So look, just experiment with it. Don't worry about it. It's a practice skill. It takes a while to get. Yeah, you know. Say I want to put more yellow in there or some orange. I'll mix up some orange in my tray and then drop some of that in. Okay, that's one thing you can do. So you can fool around with that. And if you're, another thing I want to show you here, I did this kind of design. It looks like an asparagus or something. But, you know, I wasn't really going for any particular thing. But if you have segments like this, or you have something overlapping, let's say I want to put a leaf behind this pear, like I did here, you have to have the object that you're putting, let's say I put this behind this, right? I have to have this completely bone dry. It needs to be dry. I mean, not just like you painted it 10 minutes ago and it feels dry. Use a hair dryer or something. You can use a hair dryer to dry your paintings. If you don't have a hair dryer, just set it aside and let it really dry, because otherwise what will happen is water will go, you know, whatever you have going on, if these are both wet, the paint will flow into both shapes from each other, and you don't want that. So when you have that, and I'm going to demo this here, and hopefully, I just did this not too long ago, but hopefully it's dry enough. And if it's not dry enough, you'll see what happens when it does get dry enough. But then you can just paint right up to the edge once these are dry. So I would say if you have something with segments or you have a flower with different parts of it and you don't have a hair dryer on hand, then just try just try to wait till it dries, or do varying segments. So this is a very small little area, but it's not going into the other segment, and what happens is it makes this really nice line, you know, like edge here, and that's cool. That's visually kind of pleasing. So here we go. Okay. There we go. Okay, but you can see that it's staying, it's all staying in the little shape. I think it is. Yeah, it seems to be. Anyway, it's all staying wherever the water is, as long as this, I overlapped a little bit, but you do get a nice edge on there. And I can show you on this is like when I did this flower, I did it in segments. And so you get this really nice line between the two of them. And then another thing I want to show you too is how to pull out paint. So something I have to say before I do this is some paintings are stains. And with paintings that are stains, they tend to be dye-based. And so basically when you try to pull out the paint, it never comes out white. If they're not stains, it'll come out white. But if they're stains, like Hooker's Green is a stain. So so when I pulled out the paint, it wasn't, it stayed a little bit light green. So I'll just show you, you know, we tried doing these leaf exercises, right? Like that one. I'm going to actually make a bigger leaf. I'm going to do another one like this here. Bigger leaf. There we go. Get that nice and wet. And you can get you know, if you practice this, you can get some, even though this is a 12 brush, look at that fine point I got there. I don't want that edge like that. I want a clean, nice clean edge. Okay, I have to like kind of wait for this to dry. You can also move this around. Okay, I have to wait for this to dry a little bit, but right. But when it gets, you know, when it gets dry enough, and I'll just show you what I do. What I did to get this is, here, I'm going to take my medium brush. I don't know what happened to my medium brush. That's all right. Anyway, I'm going to take a brush and I'm going to take the water out of it, okay? I'm removing the water from it, and then I'm just going to pull the paint out. It's a little too wet to do that. If you do it, the paint, when the paint's not shiny anymore and it starts to dry, is a good time to do that. You just pull it out. So practice that. See that line? So that's really cool for making, like if you want to make veins in the leaf or something, you can practice that. And I'm kind of twirling my brush to get, here we go. So every time I make a new one, I have to clean the brush out because I don't want any pigment on there. Otherwise it won't work. Clean the brush out. Okay. Right. So you can see this is drying. These colors didn't go into each other. You know, if I were going to do this whole thing, I would probably do this segment, then this segment, you know, and ones that aren't touching. Did I just do something here? Anyway, but you can get some really lovely, delicate little lines by doing that, you know, and you'll get to know, you'll get more comfortable with your paint and more familiar with it. But this is the first technique that I'm teaching you, is this wet and wet technique. And, you know, there's a lot of ways to, there's a lot of uses for this, but we're just doing this kind of botanically inspired painting. So another thing that you can do is, here, let's say you want to do some kind of organic shape. I'm just going to make a blobby shape here, okay, in orange so you can see it. Okay, now depending on how dry this is, because it will kind of dry in stages, I can take another color while it's wet, and I can do things like this here. I'm taking some Payne's Gray. I'm making it pretty dense, but I'm mixing it with a little water like I told you to do. And then you can do lines, see? And they will spread a little bit, but they have kind of a nice look with them. And I think in Misako Miki's artwork where you saw those little pictures of cats and she had kind of done dots on them, you know, like spots on them, like that, you see? They were kind of just done like that. I could tell they were done in wet and wet because the edges were fuzzy. So the drier this gets, the less fuzzy the edges will be. And if your lines start to disappear like mine did here, it's probably because I hit it when it was too wet. So let's try it now. Let's see if I can get it to be a little wet. Yeah, that works better. So it's drying. It's not entirely dry, but it's definitely drying, and it's definitely responding better to this technique here. See? You know, so you can practice this. I think that's pretty much what I wanted to show you. If you want to do, yeah, I'm just pulling this out. Yeah, it's working better because it's drier now. Okay, so you can use these techniques or not use them, you know, and like I said, you can pre-plan your design, or you can just kind of make stuff up and grow it like I did here. And, you know, just show some overlapping shapes and then some not overlapping, but at least now you know how to do that with the shapes that overlap so they don't bleed into each other. All right, so I think that's it for now, and I'll post some other videos on people doing this if I find something that's really good. Okay, bye-bye.